Hey there folks, I'm Dave. Welcome to the basement. So August so far has been pretty good as far as turntable time goes. So I have had quite a bit of an opportunity to get through some of the to be played additions to the collection and really made some good progress. Really excited about that and really excited to show you what I've added so far. So we'll start things off with this self-titled album from Sad Cafe. Came out in 1980 on Swan Song Records. This was the band's fourth album. A few videos ago, I had shown the band's debut album, and I was taken enough by enjoying that album that I mentioned that I thought I would want to dig a little bit deeper into their catalog, their body of work, and so this was the first one I came across since listening to the debut. Picked it up. And yeah, so this is quite different from the debut, for sure. This was a lot more disco-y sort of pop, with liberal use of saxophone. So, you know, as opposed to the debut album, which was much more 70s rock, which was what I found enjoyable about it. On this one, there were a couple of standouts. I could see the last song on the first side, Keeping It From the Troops, had some solid guitar parts, a little bit funky at times, a little bit heavy at times, but I found that one to be one of the more enjoyable moments of the album. The other one was second track on side 2, Losing You. I really like the groove on that, has some nice synth touches and some really strong vocals. So, but beside those two standouts, I definitely like the debut album better. So now I'm gonna kind of maybe pause and the next time I see a Sad Cafe album come across, or come across a Sad Cafe album in the bins. I don't know, maybe let me know what you think. Before, after this album, how does their sound progress and change, or do you think it kind of keeps continuing on towards the yacht rock morass that it sounds like it might be heading on this one? Yeah, let me know. So this is the self-titled album from Sad Cafe. All right, next up is an album by a band that I am glad to finally get into my collection. It's not something it's not a grail or anything like that, but it's just something I've been looking out for and finally found one of their two albums, and this is First Step by Fantasy Hill. And Fantasy Hill was a band out of Detroit. Oh, and this came out in 1978 on Prodigal Records. This is their second and final album. But anyway, Fantasy Hill was a band out of Detroit that it's kind of like what I like to call a band that has something for everybody. And by what I mean by that, you know, there's a little bit of funk, a lot of heavy rock, a little bit of R&B. They just really, you know, they didn't have a scattered sound, but they had a sound that just is one of those. It's a bar band, something for everybody in the crowd is what you're going to get with this band. If you want to check out what I mean, there's a couple of tracks on here that I think stood out. There's one called "There's a Light," which has some really great guitars, a little bit of a southern rock sound to it. Aphrodite and So Far So Good were a couple of other songs that I just think stood above the rest. I mean, it was a pretty solid album overall, but those three tracks are kind of really indicative of what I mean by when they're at their best. So, you know, I think this band was really underappreciated. And I think that has a lot to do with their lack of label support. So Prodigal, label out of Detroit, but they were more focused on, or I think their core business was sort of the funk, R&B, soul, and so when there's a rock act signed to the label, such as Fantasy Hill, just didn't. I mean, even back in the day in the local area, they just didn't get a lot of PR. I mean, they played their asses off around town, but I just don't think, you know, radio play just wasn't there for them, which is a shame. So I think this was, you know, again, if you're into the bar rock sound of the late 70s, go ahead and give Fantasy Hill a try. And this is First Step by Fantasy Hill. All right, this next one I might take a little bit of heat for, my opinion anyway. And this is Alice Cooper's Easy Action. Came out in 1970 on straight Warner Brothers Records. My copy is actually a 1973 Warner Brothers repressed. So not an OG, but yeah. So this album, yeah. So like I said, this is their second album, the Alice Cooper Band's second album. It was kind of a critical and commercial dud. Even the band tends to dismiss or distance themselves from this album for many years. I guess there was a lot of animosity between the band and producer David Briggs. But yeah, as far as music goes, I think it hints at where the band would end up going, taking their sound, beginning with the next album. I hear a lot of Frank Zappa influences going on here. And there were a couple of songs that kind of stood out above the others. I enjoyed Shoe Salesman, really melodic track with hints of the Beatles and Jefferson Airplane. Return of the Spiders, I really dig the underlying surf elements of that song. And then Lay Down and Die Goodbye has some really heavy psych elements that I thought were pretty enjoyable. But other than that, it's definitely an interesting album, but just not necessarily very entertaining. So I don't know. I don't know. Like I said, it's been panned by critics, and like I said, even the band is not really thrilled with it. But it seems to get some love out there in the VC. I don't know. I just don't hear it. If you're not all that familiar, if you're just getting into Alice Cooper Band, do not start with this album by any means. In fact, you would probably just want to hold off on this one until last, or unless you're a completist, or if you're not a completist, don't even worry about it. But I am, and the Coop is a Detroit son, so it's in the collection. It may not get spun very often, but it's here nevertheless. So yeah, this is Easy Action by Alice Cooper. All right, this next one was a complete blind buy. I bought it just based on the cover, just something about it. I just thought it might be kind of cool. And this is How High the Moon by a band called After All. And this came out in 1988 on Capitol Records. And this was only released in Canada, so this is therefore a Canadian press. It turns out After All was a Canadian band out of British Columbia. And as I said, this was their only album. Maybe I didn't say that, but I'm saying it now. It's their only album. I can hear influences, bands like U2, The Call. At times you can even hear a little bit of maybe the Hooters. Just in that, they just got a big guitar sound is basically what it boils down to. Great vocal harmonies, very catchy vocal harmonies as well. If you don't know the band, check out Save Me From Myself, the lead-off track. It has just got it's just a really nice upbeat track, great guitar tone, really nice vocals. Bullets, the very second song, has a really big guitar sound. So those are the two standout tracks for me. I mean, there was a lot of acoustic moments on this album, but in the end, overall, it just really seemed enjoyable to me. I was actually pretty surprised at how enjoyable I found this. Like I said, it was a blind buy. I expected it to be okay, but I think it's even a little bit above okay. I enjoyed it anyway. So recommend it if you come across it, if any of those other bands interest you. So yeah, this is How High the Moon by After All. All right, next up we have Fever by Annabella Lewin. Came out in 1986 on RCA. And Annabella was the lead singer of Bow Wow Wow. This is her debut solo album. And interestingly enough, she didn't release another solo album until 2012, I believe it was. And it's interesting to me because of how good this actually was. Annabella has on this so much different than Bow Wow Wow, but it's good. It's very enjoyable. Like right off the beginning, I can hear Duran Duran influences, Madonna influences. Very strong. However, as the album progresses, she definitely gets into her own groove, and you hear her own style emerge. And I thought it was good. I thought it was really interesting and really enjoyable. But for whatever reason, nothing until 2012. Anyway, if you want to check out what I'm talking about, High Powered Girl is the second track on side A. very Madonna-esque. If you are a fan of Madonna, take a listen to this song and let me know what you think, if that Madonna comparison isn't off the mark. Next up, I thought was interesting was the title track, Fever, which is a cover of a Little Willie John song. I think Peggy Lee kind of made it a hit back in '58 or so. It's pretty decent, not a bad song, or not a bad rendition of that song. What I thought was very interesting is on the kicking off side B, she kicks it off with a cover of Alice Cooper's School's Out, which actually is pretty good, and it definitely has a little bit of an edge to it. So yeah, I thought overall this was a pretty good, interesting album, and happy to have picked it up. So yeah, if you're, like I said, if you're interested in Madonna adjacent female singers, check out this debut from Annabella Lewin titled Fever. Alrighty, last up for today is another blind buy I picked up solely on the basis of the cover, and this is the self-titled debut album from a band called Espionage. Came out in 1983 on RCA Records, and it turns out that they were a synth-pop group out of England. They play this very, very upbeat, high energy sort of synth-pop. Very, very interesting use of keyboards, I thought, at least in my opinion. There's also more than a touch of an AOR sound to their style, which just adds to the appeal. For me, anyway. To check out what I'm talking about, how about the title, or not the title, the lead-off track, Sound of Breaking Hearts. Really cool groove to that one, very catchy synth. Really enjoyed that one. The last track on side A is Living Under Rocks, which is a great guitar-driven song with some of that progressive AOR influences or elements that I've been talking about. That was enjoyable. And then Can't You Feel My Heartbeat? That's got a super catchy groove. That one's definitely going to get you moving. So, you know, but honestly, there's really not a bad song on this album, in my opinion. If you're a fan of 80s synth pop, give this one a try. I think you'll enjoy it. This is the self-titled album from Espionage. All right, guys. Thanks for stopping by. That's all I got this week. I'm hoping to come back with a CD finds or update video towards the end of the month, and maybe even a vinyl part 2. Not really sure about that. In a couple of weeks here, my wife and I are going to be going to Scotland. So if you know of any record stores that I need to check out while I'm over there, I'm basically going to be Edinburgh and up. Let me know. I'll see if I can fit it into our schedule and make sure to bring back some loot. So if I don't get any of these videos out, I hopefully get at least one out by the end of the month before we go. Look forward to hearing from you, and yeah, I will talk to you all soon, possibly before I go, definitely when I get back. Cheers.